Well, when you get to the New Testament, you have an interesting organization. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John ask and answer the question, who is Jesus and what does it mean to follow him? The book of Acts is what did the people who followed Jesus do after Jesus left. In fact, if the word acts didn't make sense to me as a kid. If you just add a few syllables to it, the actions of the apostles. In Greek, the title for the book of Acts looks like the word practices. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who is Jesus? What does it mean to follow him? And then what did these people do after Jesus left? You can outline the book of Acts either biologically or biographically, Peter and then Paul, or you can outline the book of Acts geographically, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. Because Jesus tells his disciples, that's what you're going to do. You're going to be my witnesses, first in Jerusalem, then in Judea, then in Samaria, then the uttermost parts of the earth. So you find Peter and Paul, and you find them going to cities like Colossae and Thessalonica and Galatia, and you run into people like Timothy and Titus. And then after you finish the book of Acts, all of a sudden you have this series of books, and they've got titles that match the cities that we met in the book of Acts. And so it's a mature Christian, an apostle, writing letters to a mission-filled church to help them solve their problems. And if you can ever identify the problem they were having in the church, whether it was false teaching or circumstances or not getting along with each other or being persecuted, if you can identify what the problem was and the idea about Christ or the theology that solves that problem, then you get what we call task theology. And so that, when I read the New Testament, I try to look at what problems are these books addressing and what Christ's attitude or what theology is used to solve those problems. So when I teach people, how to use their New Testament, I said, you're really looking at, this is a collection of letters helping young Christians or immature Christians, you don't have to necessarily be young to be immature, how to solve their problems. So we get to the book of Thessalonica. And these folks were having some real issues with what happened to people when they died. Had the Lord already come back? Had they missed it? Some things about people believing that the second coming of the Lord was so imminent they just quit working. And so Paul's writing them, and kind of as an offshoot, he reminds them that when I was with you, this is what I did. And so based on the theme of our series, I thought this would be a good kind of a discussion starter or jumping off spot. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 10. You are witnesses, and God also, of how devoutly, justly, and blamelessly we behaved among you who believe. And you know that we treated you, or we dealt with you as a father does his own children. We encouraged you, we comforted you, and we urged you that you live lives worthy of God who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. So the first thing that happens if we're talking about, getting people back involved or reconnecting or encouraging one another to participate in good works, the first thing is kind of a self-evaluation. Paul said, when we were with you, when we lived in your city, when we were interacting with you, how does he describe their behavior? We were blameless. What else?
Devout.
We were devout. And what else? We were honest. And if you look at the various translations, you'll find that we were innocent, we were just, we were fair, we were consistent. It's not that they were perfect, he said, but you need to understand that when we were interacting with you, we behaved in a way that was consistent with what we were teaching. I heard a guy say one time, there's two primary reasons that people aren't Christians. Reason number one, they don't know any Christians. Reason number two, they've met some of us. The number one predictor for at-risk spiritual behavior in children is this question. Do your parents profess things in public that they do not practice in private? I can sit down with any teenager anywhere and ask that question. Do mom and dad say this on Sunday and live like this on Monday? And if that child answers me that in the affirmative, I can predict with better than 90% accuracy some type of at-risk spiritual behavior. And that's alarming. One of the things in George Barna's studies on church growth is he says that you can look at three factors that influence whether or not children stay faithful in their church. What happens at home, what happens at church, and how influenced they are by popular culture. So you have these three factors: what happens at worship, what happens at home, and then whether or not those children are susceptible to cultural influences. Two of those three things we can manipulate. And by manipulate, I don't mean some nefarious, it's just that's a variable we can adjust. We can absolutely control what happens in our fellowship at church. We can absolutely control what happens at home. Interestingly enough, in the follow-up of that study, the dynamic at home wasn't mom's relationship to daughter, mom's relationship to son, or dad to daughter. It was mom and dad's relationship to each other. And that children saw how mom and dad treated each other and said, this is not devout, just, or blameless. This is not consistent. This is not right. This is not fair. This is not honest. You know, dad's a very patient guy, and as he works with the deacon in charge of grounds, but he comes home, he blows his top with mom. And so that if we're encouraging people to come back, you know, we may have to do some self-evaluation. Ask, why is it easy for people to avoid us? Why is it easy for people not to hang out with us? Why is it easy for people not to join us? Is it been that, and I think sometimes tough circumstances kind of bring the cream to the top. And it may be that they've gotten this mixed message from us about what was important and what wasn't important. Maybe some inconsistencies have shown up. So we control what happens at home. We can control what happens at church, whether or not we behave lives that are worthwhile. You know, what do kids see when they read our Facebook posts? What do kids see when they see us at the ball field? What do kids see? And folks who've missed fellowship and then see us out and we're not acting consistent or devout or blameless or fair or honest, they go, you know what, I really don't need that. And so we've got to ask ourselves, number one, is there unfinished business in my relationships and the way I've been living that would discourage people from coming back? So what happens at church, what happens at home, and then how influenced they are by popular culture. I heard at a men's conference in Texas, the guy said, ships don't sink because they're in the water. Ships sink because water gets into them. Ships are designed to be in the water. Read the prayer from John 17. Jesus talks about his disciples being in the world but not of the world. He said, they're not any more of the world than I am, but I want you to be in the world. I don't want you to take them out of the world. So we've got to live in popular culture. We've got to go to work. We've got to go to school. We've got to, because if we isolate ourselves, we don't have any influence. But when we're out there, are we in the water or the water in us? And sometimes we have to be careful with our kids about that, but sometimes you do the best job you can and your children decide, I want to follow the Kardashians rather than follow Jesus. Not that I understand anything the Kardashians have ever done, but I just use them as an example. So Paul says, you noticed when we were with you. So Paul's about to tell these people some hard stuff. But before he does any kind of encouraging, he reminds them that he's from a platform that he can encourage. We were devout, we were just, we were holy, we were fair, we were honest, we were blameless. And so we were consistent. So that's the first thing that we do with this text. The next thing is, he says, and you notice that when we were among you, we did three things. Now, it's interesting that Paul, being a bachelor and not having any children, uses a fatherly metaphor. He said, we treated you in the same way a father does his own children. This is a great outline for a parenting lesson. Paul said, when we were with you, we did three basic functions. So what are the three things Paul said that he did when they were with them? What else? Comforted. And what else? Encouraged. Now, if you look at those three functions about how to re-engage people in fellowship, last week we talked about attention, belonging, and support. That's real close to that same list. We encouraged you, we comforted it, and we urged you that you walk worthy of God who calls you to his own kingdom and glory. So what does it mean to encourage?
Encouraging somebody.
To infuse courage into somebody. Think about somebody in your life who has encouraged you. Did any particular image or name or person come to mind? Well, you're very kind. I appreciate that. And you, my brother, have encouraged me many times. And Barry Crumrine has encouraged me very many times. But think about those people that influenced you as a younger person or a younger Christian. And when you received that courage from them, how did it affect the trajectory of your life? Now, how do we give courage to people who have disconnected? How do we give courage to people who are falling away? How do we give courage to people who are not because they broke their habit of regular attendance? And if you don't do something regularly, something else will take its place. Every single time. Like you think, man, when I get through a school, I'll have all this time. When I get through a grad school, I'll have all this time. And no, time is a vacuum. And when you have free time, stuff fills it up. So how do we encourage the folks that could be here that aren't, that should be here that aren't? What's a way to encourage people?
Well, we said last week, sending notes, cards, picking up the phone and calling them and just inviting them to service or inviting them to lunch or just getting in their space.
Encouraging people requires contact with people. Now, there's kind of this, I don't know if it's a force continuum. When we teach Fred Jones's book, Positive Classroom Discipline, he said anytime you're involved in a conflict with a student, calm equals control. So if you do something that I don't like in a classroom and I blow my top, I'm entertainment at that point. Calm equals control. Time equals consistency or commitment. And then proximity equals intensity. We teach that to the cops. The closer a guy is, the more dangerous the situation is. We teach artificial distance. I may be close to you, but if I put something between me and you. So calm is control, time equals commitment, but for encouragement, proximity equals intensity. You can't be very encouraging to someone that you're distant from. You can't be very encouraging to someone that you're not close to. You can't really be encouraging to somebody that you're not connected to. We have this activity on our challenge course. It's a giant teeter-totter. We need to fire the guy who named it because he's not very creative. It's a giant teeter-totter. It's this big built square thing, and it's built on a pivot. And you put the group on it, and they have to balance it. And then once they balance it, we make them sing the song, Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream 3 times without it touching the ground. A couple of things are interesting about that activity. The groups that get on it and can't balance it are reactive groups. If it starts to tilt this way, everybody moves that way. If it starts to go that way, everybody moves that way. And they never find, everybody tries to do the same thing at the same time, and it won't balance. Some groups can't balance it. Now that's rare, but they just can't. Sometimes it's little things affect your balance. We had a group of girls from Girls Incorporated, and I believe they were all Southern Baptist. If there were 16 girls, there were 14 Southern Baptist. Because when they would sing the song, they would start to swing. A row. And if you move on that teeter-totter, I said, girls, you can't swing when you sing. You got to just sing. But when we find a group that can't balance, we take them off, and we say, okay, everybody get in a group of 3. To quote the great Mike King, line up in pairs of 3 and line up in a circle. And people just scratch their head. We get them in groups of 3. Now everybody's in a group of 3. In your group of 3, somebody be Mo, somebody be Larry, somebody be Curly. So they'll Mo, Larry, and Curly. Some of these kids don't even know who Mo, Larry, and Curly are anymore. Then you get them back on the teeter-totter, and you say, all the Mo's sit down. All the Larrys freeze. And all the Curlys can move. And you'd be surprised what happens when everybody has a separate job and everybody does their own job. That's a pretty interesting dynamic. The other side is when you don't have to do Moe, Larry, and Curly, and people aren't all being reactionary, the people who balance the teeter-totter the quickest are groups that once they get on, they grab each other. Groups that touch each other, are connected, have more balance. And I can't encourage you if I'm not spending time with you. I can't encourage you if I'm not talking to you on the phone, talking to you after services, talking to you before services, if we're not eating out, if we're not visiting in each other's homes. It's very difficult to give encouragement that's long distance. That doesn't mean you can't, but it's not as easy to do. What's some more ideas about encouragement? Tommy Caldwell, famous climber, wrote the book The Push. It's about climbing in and I can't say it right, I call it Kyrgyzstan, it's politically incorrect. But anyway, they're in one of the stands, and they're climbing, and while they're on this big wall, the rebels in the valley are shooting at them. Now, I've never climbed under gunfire. I've rappelled off some buildings and shot rifles while hanging from rope, but I've never been shot at while climbing. Well, they get these guys down, and they're going to take them and probably, I don't know, sell them or something, and they're transporting these 3 American climbers across, and they get up on top of this ridge, and since these guys are climbers and the guerrilla soldiers are not, they make them lead the way. So they're going through this scrambly stuff, and the decision is made, hey, we're going to die of hypothermia if we stay out here. If we don't get back to our camping gear, they made them leave their tents and all their blankets. And the only way for us to survive is for one of these guys to die. And they push this dude off this cliff. And Tommy Caldwell wrote a book called The Push. He comes home from that, loses a finger in a table saw, a 9-fingered climber, and then he and Jorgensen decide to climb the hardest wall on El Capitan, called the Dawn Wall. They lived on the side of the wall for 29 days. To free climb it. Now, they didn't free solo, but if you climb from point A to point B and you don't use the rope to pull you, you just use the rope to catch you, and you can connect all the moves, that's called a free climb or a red point. And they did this massive monolith on El Cap called the Dawn Wall. It took them 29 days to connect all the routes. And in talking about this, he said the reason he's a world-class 9-fingered climber and survived this thing, he said, because of my dad. He said, my dad believed that his job was to prepare his children for the path, not prepare the path for his children. Now, when you think about encouraging people in church work, are we too hard on them or are we too soft on them? What makes you say that?
I think that there can be a lot of pressure. Well, in my mind, I just thought there can be a lot of pressure. Like as you're talking, I'm thinking about like even the kids I grew up with, who I felt like their parents they are wonderful people, but their kids are no longer in church. Well, what went wrong? Because they had the same thing that I had growing up. And I think that some of that maybe has been that they were too hard. They would be too hard. And then they were like, this is not worth it.
And people get discouraged in church or in fellowships because we tend to compare our insides with everybody else's outsides. I compare what I know about me to only what I can see about you. So a point of encouragement is to let people know they're allowed to grow at their own rate. A point of encouragement is to let people know that it's okay not to be just like brother so-and-so who's been a member of the church for 75 years. I found out something interesting, that mileage equals time in a car. Shocked me to death. My wife, our daughter left home, went to college, and since we were not in the soccer mom, volleyball mom business anymore, we got rid of an SUV, and she got a little 2-seater hybrid and was driving around thinking she was just cooler than the other side of the pillow. And then we had grandchildren, and now I need a mama-mobile. So I'm buying new cars like I'm changing underwear. So a couple of Valentines ago, she got a little car. It's a little mama SUV that she can haul grandkids and her dog around in. And they're quite proud of their little car there that we bought. And they said that if we bought this car, we get this luxury package, that for a year we get free maintenance. Well, this was before my wife retired. So you know who does the maintenance on the car. So number one, I have to do maintenance on it during deer season. Early in the morning, I'm driving around in this frizzy little SUV thing, and I drive up to the place, and the lady says, well, how are we doing this morning? I said, it's deer season. It's 7 o'clock. How do you think I'm doing? Anyway, so they do the service on the car. I get ready to pick the car. The lady says, that'll be $75. I said, whoa. You said that I had a year of free maintenance on this car. She goes, yeah, but this car has X number of miles on it. That equals a year.
That math didn't work out too good.
Not the way, but you know what? Think about a guy who's been playing baseball for 10 years and another guy who's been playing baseball for 10 years. This guy goes to the batting cage once a week. This guy goes to the batting cage 5 times a week. Have they both been playing baseball for 10 years? We call it mat time in jiu-jitsu. Your mat time, a guy who rolls 4 or 5 days a week versus a guy who trains once a week, you train for the same amount of time. One got to be light years ahead of the other. Sometimes we don't grow like we should in Christianity or like we could in Christianity simply because of limited mat time. Now, sometimes we expect ourselves to be where you are, but I didn't have the same opportunities, the same advantages, or I didn't take advantage of the same things. And sometimes that happens. Now, I've done some parenting classes with you guys before, but since you brought that up, I want to take a left turn and show you a diagram that I think really affects children in the church. This is from a thing called the EPAC test. This is permissiveness. This is control. This is hostility. And this is love. So if you take this test and you break it into 4 quadrants and you ask people, hey, describe how your parents parented you, you can end up in one of 4 quadrants. Quadrant number 1 is hostile permissiveness. I don't care what you do, just don't bother me. Now, we probably all have moments like that in parenting, right? Don't you have a room? Don't you have an Xbox? Well, be like a normal kid and play a video game. Leave me alone, right? But we don't care what they do, but we're hostile with our permissiveness. Some people are hostile with their control. We're scared to death. It's authoritarian. It's the old joke, what do you say to a kid with 2 black eyes? Nothing. You done told him twice. That harshness, or as Bill Cosby used to say, hey, I'll make another one just like you. Then you have parents who are described as parenting their children with permissive love. I just don't want you to be unhappy. I'll never take the training wheels off your bike. I'm not going to let you go anywhere where you're uncomfortable. I'm not going to make you do anything that's hard. I'm going to fix all your meals and do all your laundry, and I'm going to raise somebody who's absolutely happy but helpless. And then there's loving control. And this child is a reflection of the parent. And you're going to make all A's and you're going to be all American. And I'll write your Lads to Leader speech for you. And I'll make sure that you're the best and the brightest. And I'll go down there to the school and we'll straighten that coach out and you will be the pitcher. And all of a sudden the expectations are you better look good whether you feel good or not. And you better act good whether you're good or not. And these kids can't talk about we have struggles. These kids can't address openly and honestly, hey, mom and dad fight. Mom and dad won't talk openly and honestly that they're having struggles. By the way, these are kids who kill themselves. And these are kids who rebel against the church. I've had the parents of these kids come into my office and something terrible going on in their lives. And they're more worried about the church not knowing than they are this kid's going to lose his soul. There's a lot of correlations with this. And I think that's what you were describing, that you've got these kids and this harshness of you're going to dot all your I's and cross all your T's just like I do mine. If you don't, you're not worthy. That's a tough way to live. And people who live that way, and it's not that in this, and this, children who come from this grew up to be adults like this. And it's not that they believe they can't be good. They believe they can't be good enough. And what happens at some point if you believe you can't be good enough?
Stop trying.
You just quit. You know, I kill myself and you're not happy. I don't do anything and you're not happy. I get the same results, less work. Sign me up, right? So I think that may have addressed some of what you said, because we do sometimes, on one extreme, make it very difficult for people to be encouraged because we point out what they're doing wrong instead of what they're doing right. Yes, sir.
Where do you want to be in that?
I'm sorry. So as you, I'm glad you didn't let me walk out of here without that. As they studied, and this was normed on a prison population. The guy doing this study said we can't find any successful people. So let's talk to unsuccessful people and find out how they got that way. And so they gave this prison population this EPAC test, expectations of parental autonomy and control is what EPAC stands for. And you could really, if a kid said that they were parented here, you could predict with like 60% accuracy the use of marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, sedatives, hallucinogens, and harder stuff, heroin, that kind of stuff. In this slice of the pie, it was a very narrow slice of the pie, you had 0 occurrences of any at-risk behavior. So that's where you want to be. You want to be love with the absence of hostility, enough permission that children learn to grow into maturity, and enough control that you held them accountable for their actions. Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. That's everything on this side of the building. But bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. A scientific test validates what Scripture's already said, or Scripture validates what their scientific test said. This was a really interesting. Anybody who ended up here, it was like, yeah, hey, Mom and Dad gave us some freedom, but Mom and Dad also had some rules and expectations. And they understood that discipline was not punitive and discipline was not vindictive. It was always to teach a lesson. Real interesting. So we do that with church members. And whether we do it for real or whether it's just a perception, it happens sometimes. And when we start building, quote unquote, our spiritual self-esteem off of comparing ourselves with other people, folks, you'll lose that comparison every time. The other end of that is the spiritual narcissist who thinks he's God's gift to the kingdom and he's better than everybody else. And we've got a version of our fellowship that believes that they're the gatekeepers for righteousness too. And so it's very, very damaging to our kids. There's an essay based on the work by Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. She wrote the book Mindset, and it talks about that some people think that they are gifted intellectually or athletically. And a person who believes they're intellectually or athletically gifted has a fixed mindset. And that fixed mindset is that this is my identity. And they have 0 tolerance for failure. They have 0 tolerance for difficulty. And so if you give fixed mindset, well, actually, in her book, you can give a test to 2 groups of kids. Same test. And on the results, you don't tell them the truth. You go, hey, you scored a 9 out of 10 on this test. You must have worked really hard. You take a different group of kids, go, you scored a 9 out of 10 on this test. You must be smart. This group of kids thinks we're smart because of our numbers. This group says we did well because we worked hard. Now I'm going to give you another test. Would you like a test easier than this one or harder than this one? This group of kids will take the harder test every time. This group of kids will take the easy test. Because if you do good, what are you? You're smart, gifted, and talented. Well, we don't have time to take that test. I want you to tell another student who's going to take this test how to study on it and tell them your score. This group of kids lies about their score to the person. I made a perfect score. I made a 9, not an 8. because their identity is I'm smart, gifted, or talented. And as I was reading that, I read it doing some sports psychology work for some guys, and I thought about, that happens in the church. There are people who think they are smart, gifted, and talented spiritually. And then there are folks who think they're not smart, gifted, and talented spiritually. And so there's a little essay done called Cognitive Spiritual Development. And it's a Christ-centered approach to spiritual self-esteem. And it basically talks about 4 groups of people in the church and how they have difficulties feeling that they're good enough. So that's the side of the board that says, hey, when we try to encourage people, we're too hard on them. Have you ever noticed anybody or a situation where you were too easy on people? Anybody have a boat? There are no boat owners in the room. You have a boat. How many times do you have to take somebody fishing before you would like for them to help you buy gas? Maybe bring some Cokes, maybe buy some ice, or bait their own hook. What? Depends on who it is. How many times do we have people come into the church and they expect to be the guest all the time? I jokingly say, you don't have to have a boat if you have friends who have boats. The guy that we bow fish with, we give him money every time we go bow fishing. Because you know what? It's worth what I give him to when we leave the river to go home and go to bed. Because when he leaves the river, guess what he's got to do? He got to clean the boat, got to do something with the fish, got to put gas back in it, got to get ready for the next trip. If I'm not going the next trip, I got to worry about that stuff. How many times have people come into the church and wanted to be the perpetual guest? And how do we encourage people, hey, it's your turn to buy some gas. It's your turn to bring a cooler of Cokes. It's your turn to learn how to bait some hooks. Hey, I want you to come fishing with me, but we're going to take 2 new people, and I want you to teach them what I taught you the last 5 trips we went on. But what happens in worship sometimes is that we come into the fellowship and we never encourage people to grow by giving them responsibilities, by asking them to do, by asking them to contribute. In creating self-reliance, people must feel like I'm capable, I'm significant, and my choices affect my outcomes. When we encourage people to do their jobs, we teach them I'm capable, I'm significant, and your choices affect your outcomes. If you're disconnected from our fellowship because you haven't been showing up, don't make that my fault. And some of them I have to say, hey, it's time to be a partial boat owner, not a guest on the boat all the time. Does that make sense? So that's one factor. How do we reconnect people? We encourage them. Number 2, we comfort them. Now, what does comfort mean? Yeah, we ease people's pains, or what happens when you run into a situation you can't solve the problem? Are you uncomfortable with problems you can't solve? And it's terrible. I don't, every guy in the room, when your wife talks to you about something, she doesn't want your genius. She wants your attention. I'm serious. Go home sometime and Google on YouTube, it's not about the nail. It's just beautiful. Have you seen that? It's this beautiful little skit. They close it on this little girl's face. She goes, I just feel like I have this pressure. I don't know, it's like I've got this pressure. And as the camera backs out, she got a nail in her forehead. And I don't know how to describe it, but it's just, and her husband goes, well, you have a nail. It's not about the nail. And no, I think if you just pull, don't, you're always trying to fix things. And then she goes on this rant about how, and then the best line in the thing, she goes, and all my sweaters are snagged. And whoever wrote that is a genius. But he goes, oh, I bet that's really hard. Yes, it is. And then they hold hands, and then they try to kiss, and she hits him in the head with it. And she goes, well, she goes, don't. And sometimes we don't like to be in situations where we can't solve the problems. This word does not say problem solve. What does that word say? Comfort. We call it the ministry of presence. We get so busy worried about being right that we forget how powerful it is to be right there. Job's friends show up, and what do? For how many days? What do they say? Nothing. And then they start talking and you get 41 chapters. Okay? The best thing you can do sometimes when you run into somebody who needs comfort is just show up and sit down and shut up. But we feel like we have to say something. And people tell me all the time, man, I'm so uncomfortable when I visit a funeral home, I don't know what to say. Well, thank goodness you're not supposed to say anything. You're supposed to listen. And comfort sometimes is just about being there and weeping with them. And I know people mean well, and I know people want to do well, but offering people platitudes of, I know how you feel, and you really don't, and it'll get better, and it'll be all right. Remember when the Bible says that no temptation has taken you, but is common to man, but the Lord will provide a way for escape. He also says the Lord will not put on you any temptation that is greater than you can bear. That's about temptation, not about life circumstances. All of us run into things that we can't bear. That's why we need each other. And so when we really learn how to comfort, it really is the ministry of presence. It's showing up in uncomfortable, dirty situations and not being able to do anything about it, but willing to sit there till the person is through grieving, or be a constant companion while somebody is continually grieving. You can't fix it when a baby dies. You can't make it better when somebody's marriage breaks up. You can't walk in when somebody's kid leaves the church and go, well, it'll be great. And these platitudes, well, God has a plan. Romans 8:28 doesn't say God does these things. Romans 8:28 says God uses these things. But God doesn't create those circumstances. Because if God made you do that, then you don't have free will. And I think the Bible talks about free will. And so when we learn how to comfort people, it's described in 1 Corinthians 12 when it says the body has the same care one for another. We rejoice with those who rejoice. We weep with those who weep. And we offer our shared experience to say, you know what, I can't fix this, I can't make it better, but I'm going to sit with you for 7 days and not say a word. And then the only words I really need to say is, I love you. And then probably if I'm dealing with grief or somebody who's convalescing, I don't ask, what can I do for you? I tell them, I'm going to do this. And if they tell me no, I honor that, but most of the times they won't tell you no. I'm going to come get you and take you. You shouldn't. Or you're telling me I can't? No. All right. I try to honor no's. I don't walk through a no. But when we comfort people, it's about our being willing to sit with them during their grief when we are powerless to help them. And we don't like to do that because nobody likes to feel powerless. I'd much rather be the guy sick than sitting beside the bed of my wife or my children who are sick. Because when you sit there by the bed of somebody who's sick, you can't fix it. And when you're the guy in the bed, you don't have to fix anything. You either get well or you don't. It's a win-win either way. Either get better or go to heaven. So, but I don't always want them to leave me. And so we encourage, we comfort, and this word pleaded, is there another translation there for that? Implored? Anybody else? Urged. Interestingly enough, all three of these words look super similar in Greek. They're very similar to parakletos, the word that Jesus used for the Holy Spirit, describing him as the helper. And so he says, first things we do with people is we encourage you. We infuse that courage into you. We invite you to quit being a guest on our boat and participating in some things with our boat. You're not always the new. It's time for you to greet somebody at the door and take them to lunch today. I'm not always taking you to the Mexican restaurant. You need to be inviting somebody else with us. You need to bring somebody into your house, that kind of stuff. We encourage people to build those skills, help them. Hey, I'm going to miss my Bible class this week. Would you like to start the discussion? Here's 7 questions you can ask. You know how to get over anxiety?
Do it.
Immerse yourself in it. And that's the only way to do it. Okay? So we encourage people. Then when people run into crisis, whether it's spiritual, emotional, financial, psychological, we're there as a presence. And then those of us who have skills, whether it's financial advice or child rearing advice or emotional support or psychological advice, we do those things that fall into our realm if we can. And then the other thing we do is we plead, we implore, we urge. And I think this is a place for accountability. I think sometimes it's okay for me to say, I thought you made a promise to God about this. And I hadn't seen you holding up your end of it. Anybody holds you accountable for anything? You know why it's hard to announce you're on a diet? I thought you were on a diet. What's that?
When you stay fat, they don't think.
When you stay fat, they don't think you're doing it. That's right. My wife left town today with the grandkids. I'm just saying, they will not make it home. I'm just saying, all right? Now, I'll run tomorrow, I promise. But, you know, I think that's part of the importance of the public confession when you become a Christian. Had a lot of people in a big room watched me die to self and rise again to walk a new life. And when I don't walk that consistently, I think you've got the ability. In fact, I think you're honor bound to, hey, I don't think this is what you promised.
The biggest thing there is nobody likes accountability.
I don't like it. You know, I like it when my wife says, hey, I didn't think you're supposed to have it. I'm not really supposed to eat a lot of sugar. I have a little bit of a low blood sugar irregularity. I control it mostly with exercise, but I do somewhat control it with diet. Some things, bread absolutely throws me off the wheels. It metabolizes quick. So donuts, cakes, that kind of stuff, off the limits. Cookies, probably have a bad night tonight. She's not there, so I'll just go home with it. I'll go to bed with a headache. Honey doesn't seem to bother me, but she thinks it bothers me. I have honey. Put honey in my oatmeal, put honey in other things, honey in my, chocolate and hot chocolate, sugar-free hot chocolate, put honey in it. And she's like, you've had honey, you're grouchy. Baby, honey doesn't make me, yeah, I can tell when you've had honey. Well, I bought me some sugar-free honey. And she was happy with that.
There you go.
And then the sugar-free honey ran out. And I got them little honey bears from Walmart and was transferring the contents into the empty sugar-free. And I had that scam going for about a month and a half. I mean, I was rocking the honey. Miss Jones saw the sugar-free bottle and apparently didn't think I was grouchy. My daughter comes home and we're having some little discussion about something. And I made the mistake of confronting my daughter and going, well, that doesn't really sound honest. And she said, you want to talk honest? You got little honey bears buried in the backyard like a serial killer. And so she threw me under the bus about my honey. And so now I'm back accountable for my honey again. We don't like it when people say, I thought you said this. I thought you promised that. I think we're biblically bound in some cases to go to people and say, hey, I love you and I'm worried about you.
I think it's hard too, because I think you can look at yourself and maybe see the things that you're not doing that you should be doing. And sometimes you think, how can I say it to them when I'm also not?
And I think that's the...
Maybe that helps you too, then.
Well, I think you go, you know what? I haven't been visiting other people like I should. Would you go with me tomorrow? Now I've asked you to help me while holding you accountable.
That's for each other.
Let's do a weight loss challenge together. Let's start a fitness group, or Ben and Travis have the 30-day challenge coming up on their podcast, and it's just a way to encourage people. And I think sometimes we feel like, oh, you're judging me. Judging in Matthew 7 is where you have a standard that you give yourself a pass on something big, and you give somebody else an indictment on something little. And you're using their mistakes to make you feel better. That's what judging is in Matthew 7. Judging does not mean when I've got a pure standard of right versus wrong, and I can say, hey, that's wrong, and call you out on it. Now, that is some of the most uncomfortable work you'll do as an elder, some of the most uncomfortable work you'll do as a minister, and it's absolutely the most difficult stuff you'll do as a friend. I don't tell this story often. But I was engaged once before I married Miss Jackie. One of those things, new girl came to the university and everybody was awestruck over her. And it was like almost just I couldn't get a date with her. And almost like just did it because I could. But we hit it off really well. Pretty compatible. But there were just some things there that weren't right. And I knew it. My friends knew it. But it was almost this, you can't tell me what to do thing. And I was locked into this, I'm going to marry this girl. Bought her a ring. And a guy from Texas named Paul Richardson lives in Atlanta now. He's a CPA, one of my dear, dear friends. Kicked my door in. Said, Jones, I know you're going to throw me out. But before you throw me out, this is what you need to hear. And he lined me up pretty good. And he was right, I threw him out. Grabbed him by the collar, grabbed him by the bed, little bitty fella. Out he went. 2 days later, he drove with me to that girl's mother's house for me to call off that wedding. And without him, it'd be a different story. And I owe the courage of a guy willing to ruin our friendship and suffer a little bit of bodily harm to step in. You read the story of the demon-possessed man, that he's often bound with chains. And it's a cool story, and I can't prove this. But I asked this question, who put the chains? We used to call him Crazy Charlie. Doug, we called him the demon dude. Who put the chains on Crazy Charlie? I have a lesson entitled, Who Chained Charlie? And you only have one of two options. You're sitting down there, a day like this, the windows are up, you're about to eat supper, it's getting dark, out in the cemetery, you hear him start cutting up. Wah! You get up, you kick stuff over, you know what? I'm tired of that fool. You can't have a decent funeral without that rascal acting up. Kids are scared to play outside. I'm going to go shut that business down. And you walk out into the dark with a chain. I've never, if you ever seen a man break a chain. I saw a guy on third shift one night pull a pair of handcuffs apart and tear the door off a sports car. It was a scary thing. And there was nothing supernatural going on with that. It was PCP. This was supernatural. And you've got to hate Charlie really, really bad to go out there in the dark and wrap him up in a log chain. Scenario number two is you're sitting there, windows are open, you're about to eat supper, it's getting dark, and you hear him start cutting up. And you look at your wife and you say, one of these nights he's going to cut himself and he's going to bleed out. And if it gets much colder than it is tonight, he'll end up there naked in those tombs. He'll freeze to death. Who knows what he's eating up there? I got to go do something about it because I love him. You got to love a man big time to walk out in the dark and put chains on the demon. You got people who aren't here, and they're out in the dark, and they're doing self-harm. And we can hate them and talk bad about them and judge them, or we can decide we love them enough to encourage them, to comfort them, and then to urge them to go out into the dark and face the demon because we love them. And if we choose to do that, we probably get people better connected than they are. And if nothing else, we would be better connected just for the effort of having done so. So, devout, just, blameless, encourage, comfort, and urge are the part 2 of our series on how to reconnect, how to encourage people after COVID. Any questions, comments, closing statements?
Watched a TV show yesterday, and you wouldn't believe this, but it was actually a lot about this because it was about getting somebody engaged, re-engaged, and their solution. It was make him part of the solution.
Yes.
What we talked about here. But I actually saw that on TV, believe it.
Well, you'll find that any sound psychological principle is in this book. And if it's not in this book, it's not a sound psychological principle. And all major leadership models fit Jesus or David. And everything that talks about human relationships falls under the teachings of the New Testament. And you just can't get away from it. Everything from John Gottman's writings, and he's Jewish, all the way to the LaHaye series. They're all about New Testament principles. And truth is truth. It doesn't matter if a roaring pagan discovered gravity, gravity's still gravity. And who put it in place? If it's true at A, it's true at Z. That's what makes it true. You'll be surprised at the biblical truths you'll find in general, because truth is truth. And you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in God to see God's truth in things. Anybody else?
Earlier
Okay, calm equals control.
Yeah.
Time equals commitment. And proximity equals intensity. So, when I ask a student to do something in a classroom setting, I'll stare him down, and it gets super uncomfortable. You want him to do something, and you just keep looking at him. You don't plead with him. You don't smile. You don't negotiate it. It's a simple. And then when I move into their space, they get super uncomfortable. See, she's smiling at me. Smiling's a sign of submission in primates. And she'll glance at her friends to see if they'll bail her out. And then when I start asking her questions, she'll start giving me yeses. She'll promise me her soul to get me out of her space. And so that's a thing we do. Fred Jones, positive classroom discipline, using body language to deal with kids. It works with your kids at home too. It's pretty cool. All right, anybody else? We'll look forward to next week. We'll start again and we'll wrap up. I'll start next week with letting you ask questions. And if there are no questions, I'll dive into some stuff. If there are questions, we'll fill them and then see if we can dive into stuff. But thank you guys again for letting me be a guest and for my rich history with you folks and my love and my friendship with you guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you.